with Joanne, and we'll get to that at 10:40 this morning. Bob Ezrin is going to join us in about 10 minutes. Bob just arrived here, one of the great producers, and a guy who certainly has, from everything I can gather, love of all kinds of music. You think of him as a rock guy, you know, doing Alice Cooper's great albums, Pink Floyd, The Wall, Peter Gabriel, but he's very much involved in the hip-hop community these days, and also has a ton of different community initiatives that he has been involved in. So I think there's a pretty good chance he's busier now than he ever has been. And Bob Ezrin, keynote speaker at the Canadian Music Week celebrations downtown, he'll join us. We'll actually get to a song that is as Toronto as a rock song could possibly get produced. You got it, by Bob Ezrin.
Get away from it all.
In Toronto.
Huh? You going to Toronto tomorrow?
Goes on switching. Glad the Kings are here, approaching 9:30, and Bob Ezrin joins us now. Good morning, Bob.
Oh.
Good morning, and Bob Ezrin is here.
Does that sound familiar, that particular
Sure
thing?
did. I walked to the room, I'm going, wait a minute, I know that song.
It's two parts CanCon, too, so we get two pieces of Canadian Con. Was that the first thing you worked on after The Wall?
I don't think so.
It was pretty around the same time.
It was around the same time, yeah.
And that was a great start. You had Nimbus 9 going at the time. Those guys did.
Well, we were. I was actually a partner in Nimbus 9 until the late 70s and early 80s. And then somebody else.
Give me a show later.
Took over.
Give me a show later.
And
when are you working?
We, the original partner, sold the company. So, but I went to the studio to see what was going on, and these guys were in the studio.
All right.
I just stopped in to see what was happening, and the Kings were there, and Mike McCarty was in there with the Kings, and the guys that worked at the studio as well, and I fell in love with it and said, what are you guys doing with this? This is great.
And that's exactly the way it turned out. But let's go back even a decade before that. I can only imagine how much a young man must have learned from a guy like Jack Richardson.
You can't imagine. He was like the consummate mentor, in the sense that he liked the role of being the bear, the big guy, and he liked the role of being the teacher and being the smartest guy in the room, which he always was. I can tell you that for sure. And so when they hired me, he just took me under his wing, and I basically glued myself to Jack Richardson, whether he liked it or not. I was everywhere except the toilet with him, and every minute I had that he wasn't doing something, I just asked questions, and he was very generous. He loved to explain stuff to me. So
I've been in the middle of the Guess Who around this time?
Yeah, when I went to work there, the Guess Who had just been #1 with American Woman.
Okay, so you're talking the right smack in the sweet spot.
This was it. This was the heyday. So they hired me because I had done actually a musical, and Alan McMillan, who is Jack's partner at the time, he was the music director of the show and made me assistant music director. He liked what I did with arranging rock band and stuff like that, so he brought me in to meet Jack. He said, Jack could use somebody like you. And Jack saw something in me that I didn't even know I had. I thought I was a manager. I didn't know I was going to be a producer.
You wanted to manage rock bands?
Well, I thought that's what you do. You manage a rock band, you work on their material.
But were you already a musician at that point?
Yeah. It was the only frame of reference I had, so Jack within like one day goes, I don't think you're really talking about management. You want to be a producer, and this is what we do. And he just started teaching me, and then even more generously, there was sort of a boot camp in engineering and production at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York, run by Phil Ramone and Dave Green. And Jack paid for me to go to that school and sent me down there.
That was generous.
Yeah, it was amazing. So. Yes, the best mentor ever, but which is also not. I don't want to paint an incomplete picture, because the other side of the coin was, they'd throw me into the middle of situations, and if I screwed up, I was dead meat. I was like, if I did one thing wrong, I'd have to go all the way back to the beginning and do everything over again until I got it right. And so that to me was the greatest part of my education, was actually being forged in fire, right in a studio where stuff was happening all the time, and where I had no opportunity to sort of sit there and gaze at my shoes. I had to be on all the time. I had to be aware, I had to be humble, I had to be quiet, which for me is very difficult.
I wonder, so you end up, when you talk about Feet First Into the Fire, working with Alice Cooper on the Love It to Death album.
Yeah.
How do you end up in Los Angeles with a guy who just seemingly perfectly is about to take off as you are?
Well, first, we didn't get to LA till later. But Jack, they had approached Jack to do Alice Cooper because somebody, I guess it was Shep Gordon, the manager, had decided they wanted that Guess Who sound. They heard it on the radio, and that's what they wanted. So they came in, and Jack, Jack was kind of a conservative guy on most levels. So were all of the partners at Nimbus. They were ex-advertising execs. They wore suits to work every day. And in comes this guy with pictures of these 5 creatures of indeterminate sex, and they're like, and you can't tell if Alice is a guy, he's a girl, what's going on here. And Jack didn't even want to touch the album covers, never mind get involved with the band. So he kept trying to put him off, and Shep would not take no for an answer. Well, finally, Jack just threw me under the bus. He goes, okay, I'm going to send the kid. If the kid likes it, then I'll go see him. So then they started bothering me, and literally they called me every hour of the day until I agreed to go see the band. So there was a gig in New York. We were looking at another artist altogether, and my bosses sent me to New York to see this other person. And oh, by the way, Alice Cooper's playing at Max's Kansas City that night. Go there and get rid of them.
That was your mandate.
That was my job.
Okay.
So I go down to Max's Kansas City, and it's a long story that I've told many times before. So the punchline simply is the show blew my mind. And being in a room full of people who all had spider eyes, and they were wearing spandex, had jet black hair, jet black fingernails. I've never seen anything like it. It was like stepping into a Hieronymus Bosch painting. It was a vision of hell, and yet they were having a great time, and they knew all the words. So at the end of the show, I went bounding up the stairs, and I went to the band, and with my youthful enthusiasm, I said, "We'll do it! We will produce you guys because you can make hit records." And they go, "Oh, that's good because we think you can make hit records too." And then I got out to the street, I'm going, "Oh my God, I am so fired.
I got to talk to the boss now."
Right. Yeah. So I got back here, and I got the first flight out the next morning. I didn't sleep a wink. I got back here. I went up to the office on Hazelton Avenue, and I came in the door with that, that time-worn teenage mantra. "You don't understand." That's the first thing I said. "You don't understand. There were no T-shirts. There were no jeans. They had sets and lights and props, and everybody had Spanish and spiders and blah, blah, blah. I said, "This isn't rock and roll. It's the beginning of a cultural movement." And Jack was just, he just finally said, "Enough already. If you like them so much, you do it."
And it's amazing what happened. I mean, Alice Cooper certainly changed the theatricality of rock and roll.
Oh, yeah.
But none of this would have happened had the music not been as great as it was. How good was that band? Alice Cooper's band.
Well, I think if you asked them, they'd be the first ones to say that they were raw. They were fairly raw. And basically, there was a tremendous amount of underlying talent with everybody, but there was no discipline, no sense of how it all fit together, and of each one's part in a greater whole. Like there were just lead players. There were five lead players. Everybody was either playing or singing lead at the same time.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was to just tone things down and get them under control and make it so. The philosophy I had for Alice Cooper honestly, this is just a punk kid thinking he knew something. That's the only way I got through this. I actually thought I knew something, which was completely wrong. But anyway, it was good because it got me through the project. So in my head, I said, okay, we're going to make this record it's going to be 3 musical tracks. There will be the rhythm section, there will be counter melody, and there will be melody. This is what I had in my head. So I assigned parts to everybody out of this big wash of stuff that they were playing, and I got rid of the stuff that I thought that didn't fit into those 3 buckets. And then when we put stuff together and they started to play it, it was like, wow, this is kind of powerful and clean too, So they listened to me for some God unknown reason. And Alice will say it to this day. He says, I have no idea why we listened to that kid, but we did.
but you know, there's something about so many of the records that you have produced, some greatly successful, some for varying reasons, and sometimes it's record company shuffles or things well beyond the control of the producer or the band. But you do bring something, a sonic quality that you must have learned somewhere along the way. I mean, I mentioned to you just before we came on here, Trevor Rabin, who's now done so well with film scores, had a great song called Something to Hold On To. Can't Look Away, that was the album,
yes.
But early 90s.
Electra, yeah.
Beautifully produced, Bob, and some of the sounds, and we'll get to The Wall in a few moments, and even the work that you're doing today, somehow something happened that gave you this ability, or maybe you just didn't realize you had it the whole time, to make vinyl speak.
Oh God, I wish it was all vinyl. Don't you? Wish it was all vinyl? The reality is, it's music, and whatever conveyance we use for it, that's details. It's the music that counts, and I guess, look, I was really fortunate to grow up in Toronto, Canada, in the years that I did, because we were sort of the nexus between the British sound and the American sound. It all hit here. If you think about it, even just geographically, we're the place where those two things crossed the most. We were getting R&B from Buffalo, a lot of it, and we were getting all of that British stuff, a lot of it, and our pop charts included country and Western music, and you know, we were not nearly as segmented or as genre oriented or formatted as the States were or as England was. So we got everything, and when we listened to hit, I mean, I could go from listening to the quote unquote hit parade. You could go all the way from Johnny Cash to hearing the Kinks, to, you know, and to hearing
the Singing Nun in between.
Singing Nun, yeah. So it was a very rich musical environment, and on top of that, I was trained classically. I studied a little bit at the conservatory here.
There are many producers. Bill Simzik is one of the only ones I can think of who's not known as a musician. He's more for his ear.
No, there's lots of them.
Other than not particularly good musicians?
Well, don't say not particularly good musicians. There are people whose path to production was through engineering, and they'll say, you know, I don't play anything, but I know music, and you know, sometimes a film director, you know, can be great without ever having learned how to act, or how to light, but he's got to know or how to mic something. But he just knows what works and what he needs, and he puts together the people that can get that for him.
Bob, you mentioned something that is so true. The method of delivery has changed and is continuing to change by the day, if not by the year. But in 1971, 1941, 1911, performers perform. That's what they do. Let's just say, for instance, this weekend, you happen to walk into the proverbial Cavern Club and see these 4 20-year-olds, and you go, this is what I saw in 1971. How would you take them to the next step today? Would you be at all tempted to go the traditional major label route and go the way it's gone for 40 years, or go toward the newer paradigm?
Well, I think you have to look at you really have to look at the new reality, and you can't use the word traditional and major label in the same sentence anymore. There are certain things that they do that are still part of legacy systems that they have, you know, that were built over decades, and that it's hard for them to get out of. And they do have a certain orientation towards physical product, even in a digital world, but they are fast becoming digital rights management organizations. And would I go that route? Yeah, I would go that route depending on the project. There are certain things where you can launch it with marketing, but those are kind of few and far between now. And really, the best form of Launchpad right now is the organic one, because we have this huge global community now that discovers music just on the basis of recommendation, on the basis of belonging to groups that think like we do, feel like we do, listening to what people in those groups have to say. And so things can just explode out of nowhere with no company behind them at all. Nothing. Just word of mouth and people who love what they do. So for me, when somebody says to me, how do I break into the business? The first thing I say is, don't even think in those terms. Don't try to break in, try to break out. Break out of where you are. And for me, it boils down to something as simple as this. Find a few people who are absolutely passionate about you and what you do, and ask them for some help. And then get them to ask a few people who they turn on to your stuff, who might also become passionate about what you do, for help. And the next thing you know, the word begins to, if you're really, really good, the word begins to spread and you build an audience before you ever talk to anybody.
YouTube is one of the greatest marketing tools on the planet. We've seen it. What would your response be? And honestly, I don't know the man. He could have been 100% joking. I didn't get the feeling he was. In Sound City, the documentary, ever worked there?
I had never worked there, but I'd been there.
Okay, so Rick Rubin says, kind of throwaway line, 50% of the stuff you hear on the radio today is made on a laptop. How do you respond to that? Is it true?
No, it's not true that 50% is made on a laptop, but it is true, figuratively speaking, that 50% of what you hear on the radio is manufactured by a person in their setting, whatever it is, a person or a team of people. And so a lot of these, there's these little pockets of talented young people who have nothing more than they've rented a room in somewhere, and they've put their computers and their keyboards and all that stuff in there with a bunch of screens. They never get out. The artist never shows up, but people send them stuff, and then they remix, or they create beats, or they do something that informs the record. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum, the Luke end of the spectrum, where basically he's the artist. Dr. Luke's the artist, and he makes the stuff. In a way, it's his laptop. It's just with a cap. It's a big system that he has that includes people that work for him and stuff like that. But it's his system. He creates something right then and there, and then an artist sings on it. And that's about it. So in that sense, Rick is completely correct.
So I would think then at your school with Garth Richardson in Vancouver, Nimbus School of Recording Arts, that you are basically starting with the computer and working yourself up to the kind of Neve board that they talk about in Sound City. Is it the whole, encompass everything?
Well, listen, I think you have to know your way around the whole thing. One of the good things about the education that I got was that they started from the assumption that I knew nothing, and they were right. And Jack took me all the way back to basic acoustical theory, which is really kind of important to understand if you're going to record stuff. If you're just programming, and that even in that sense, it's important to understand. You don't have to fumble in the dark to find things that work. You can actually know how to make stuff happen. So the idea behind Nimbus really was to recreate the experience that I had with Jack as my mentor, and that Garth had with me as his mentor, which is basically back to the beginning, learn the whole thing from how to wrap a cable to how to program a very complicated beat and session, and at the same time do it not in a classroom setting, but right there in the studio, where if you screw up, we kick your butt. So it's kind of like a school/boot camp, but it lasts a year. And
what's the passing rate? Everyone pretty close?
We haven't, I think we've lost one or two kids over the years since we started the school, and that would be for illicit substances or bad behavior, but not because anybody came out not knowing what they were supposed to know.
They're committed by the time they get in.
Yeah, they are, and given all the information that's out in the world right now, you rarely meet somebody that knows zero. They may know a lot of, they may have a lot of bad habits when they walk in, but they know a little something, and it's a commitment. You got to put in a year, you got to pay money. It's not something that you do lightly. So the students come in, they're typically quite serious, and they are each other's best network, actually. What's been happening for us is like the kids would meet in the school, and 3 or 4 of them would go out and start a studio, start one of those companies that we're talking about where they make those beats and they do that stuff, and a lot of them are out there making a living doing it that way, which is great. We love that.
There's still some talent and still obviously some appetite as well from younger folks these days to get into the business.
Oh yeah, it's amazing actually how many people would like to, like I say, they want to break in. I'm making quotation marks in the air. And I don't want to see them break in. I want them to have enough information so they can break out and they can make their own business.
Bob Ezrin is with us. You know, when you look, Bob, at you going from doing such tremendously creative things in an analog world to doing similar things in a digital world, one of, I guess he's a longtime friend because you've certainly worked together a long time. Another guy who has made that transition very well is Peter Gabriel.
Yeah.
There's a guy who was doing amazing things back in the 1970s theatrically and musically, and now very much immersed in today's digital world.
Oh yeah, in fact, it's a little known fact that Gabriel was a pioneer in digital distribution and I think he's made more money out of his digital entrepreneurship than he did in his musical career. So yeah, he's really serious about this stuff, and from the time that I first saw them play Genesis, when I saw them play, and I'll tell you the story. It was here in Toronto. It was at Massey Hall. I was asked to go look at Lou Reed in advance of the Berlin album. I was asked to go see Lou Reed and see if I would be interested in working with Lou Reed. So I went to the show, and the opening act was Genesis. And in those days, you showed up for opening acts, right? You just went. So I was there with the A&R guy from RCA where Lou was, who had nothing at all to do with the other band. But, you know, we saw Lou, I met Lou, and I was very excited about working with Lou. But I said to the guy, man, can I meet the kid with the flower on his head? He's amazing. Right? And you know, I say it like I was an old guy. I think I was 20 or 21 at the time, but I thought I was very mature, very mature. So anyway, so then, you know, Tony Smith called me and said, Peter's going out and going to do a solo thing, and would you be interested in, I guess the word had spread, you know, would you be interested in talking to him about working with him? And I went over there, we met. The first things we talked about were new technologies for visual presentation, how to tie the music to a film on stage, magic screens, multi-projectors, I mean, all this stuff that I was fascinated with, he was fascinated with. And yeah, so that was always his orientation.
Bob, let me try and do a little math here. And we'll get to Pink Floyd and The Wall, a project that I understand was about a year out of your life. You're talking about the musical stewardship with Alice Cooper. You then follow that up with Peter Gabriel, two of the most theatrical guys in the history of rock. Pink Floyd eventually ends up bringing in Gerald Scarfe to make the movie The Wall.
Don't forget Kiss.
And don't forget Kiss as well. Good point. You
We're
did
talking
Destroyer, yeah. No, but Bob worked with Kiss in their heyday as well. So you add those up. Is that the reason that Pink Floyd wanted you for The Wall?
No.
No?
No, the reason that
I was wrong, 100% wrong. There we go.
Yeah, it's okay. Good shot. That was a good shot. It wasn't any of that. It was something far simpler. Roger had gotten to a point in his head where it was him against the band for whatever reason. But he felt like it's my concept, it's my music, it's my this, my that, and I can't deal with those guys, and I need somebody who can deal with those guys for me. And he was complaining to his fiancée at the time, who was Caroline Waters. Caroline Christie at the time, and Caroline Christie had worked for me in London when I was doing Alice Cooper in London, when we were doing $1 Billion Babies. She was like a production assistant. She represented us over there, and so she spent a lot of time with me in the studio. And when he was saying, I need somebody, she said, well, you know, you really should meet this guy, Bob. We had actually met. We had met in her kitchen, you know, a couple of years prior, but it was very casual, like, hi, that's it. So she said, you know, you really should talk to Bob. And they flew me over there to meet with him. We talked about there were 2 records on the table, and he played both for me. There was no question in my head we had to do The Wall. The other one became Radio Chaos, I think, or Pros and Cons. I can't remember. It was one of the 2. And we started talking about how to get it done and everything. We got along really well, and they decided to hire me and that was my initial job. But when I got to London for the making of the record, I felt my job was to bring them back together and make it a group album, more than just Roger Waters' solo album that Dave Gilmour plays an occasional guitar on. So I was lobbying very hard for Dave's writing and lead playing and singing, and Rick Wright's involvement, everybody's involvement. I wanted the whole band to really be a part of the making of this record, and I wanted it to sound like a Pink Floyd record.
We know how it sounds, but I guess did you feel unfulfilled on the other part of what you believed your mission to be, to bring them together?
At the end, I guess, if you put it like that, yeah. I guess I failed.
Well, in fact, certainly did it all right on the album.
I'm so depressed.
Well, the album ended up turning
stop,
out.
John. That's it. I have no reason to live.
I can imagine that making A Momentary Lapse of Reason must have been a very different experience than The Wall. By that point, it was David Gilmour's band.
Yeah, it was. But to go back and not be silly, did I feel unfulfilled? No, listen. That product, at the time that we were finished with that thing, I don't even like the word product, why did I say that? That work of art, that really is a work of art. Many of the things I do are products, but that one's a work of art. And I used to sleep with it. This is a little known story. I would take the tapes home with me at night in the bedroom and put them on a chair beside the bed because I was so afraid that somebody would steal them or something would happen to them. There was a war going on between the band and the label here. There was a little bit of suspicion that the label was going to do a run on the vault and take all our tapes that we couldn't finish.
Well, that heavy.
Yeah, it was heavy. It was heavy. So I was sleeping, and now I look at it and I'm going like, what an idiot I was. I mean, what, the potential liability. What was I doing? But I was so passionate about this thing. I loved it so much, and I knew how important it was that I actually slept with the tapes. So when we finally played it down from top to bottom, everyone was there, and for that one moment, there was no separation, and there was no resentment or feeling of guilt or jealousy or any of that stuff. There was just this sense that the work had been worth it, and the end result of the work was beautiful.
And it remains to this day an album that sounds so beautifully recorded. It could have been done last year. But the change in the way things are done today, you would go to your sound effects vault and grab a helicopter sound. How did you get that one? It sounds so amazing. That's I would guess an actual helicopter.
We went to Edwards Air Force Base and put a couple of PZMs on a tarmac and got them to roll one of those monster Sikorsky helicopters over and fire it up. Yeah. And listen, you can go to your sound effects library, but as the film guys know, when you just go to the stock library, you don't get what you're looking for. You have to make stuff if you really want it to be, if you want it to be larger than life. Because here's the thing, when you're looking at a picture on a screen and you see an explosion and something just goes, it's almost irrelevant how good the sound is. It's just how loud it is that counts. But when you have no visual, it's just the audio, and you want to create an impression that leaves the person with a visual image, you have to make sure that the sounds are bigger than life. They can't just be, sort of a meager facsimile of what would have really happened. They got to be larger than what really happened. When it came time to bust up the TV sets, we bought a bunch of TV sets, put them in a big wooden box with blankets around it so the glass wouldn't fly, and we took sledgehammers. We put microphones in there. We took sledgehammers and smashed the TV sets because the reality was that was the only thing that sounded like what it should have sounded like.
Bob Ezrin, that's the quickest 28 minutes of my life right there. It's been great talking to you. Hopefully we can do it again in the future. I could definitely go on for some time here and hearing your stories. I've been a massive fan of your work, Bob.
I just want to throw in one shameless plug.
Please go. Shameless.
Well, two shameless plugs. One, look for the new Deep Purple album because it's really, really good.
That is called Now What? It's coming out next month.
Yeah.
How good is Ian Pace?
He's amazing. And they're all amazing. They're amazing. And this album we did with them all playing together. So it was almost like a live record that we then went and overdubbed on. But they're all just brilliant musicians and Gillen. Oh my! The lyrics on this record, phenomenal. Just phenomenal. So that's one. And the second one is to go back to the school. I just want to say that I know it's far away, but for Torontonians, if you're thinking about doing something like that, just remember this school is in Vancouver, where right now it is not freezing. And where you got mountains and ocean and really, really pretty girls.
How many students do you have at a time?
It's about 120. At a time right now, but we're adding some rooms so we can increase that number. So by the time we're finished within the building that we have, when we build out, we should be at about 300.
Bob, great to speak to you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Bob Ezrin.